Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host, Chad Vaughn, and on today's episode, we have Lindsay Shoop. Now, Lindsay is a part of our Power Monkey camp staff, being our rowing instructor, but her credential list is pretty impressive. She is an Olympic gold medalist from the Beijing Olympic Games in 2008. She is a three-time world champion, one-time former world record holder. She is also a member of the U.S. Rowing Hall of Fame and also a two-time NCAA All-American at UVA. She has since moved on to doing some performance coaching now that her competitive career is over. She is also an author whose book just recently came out, title being Better Great Than Never. Believing it's possible is where champions begin. She's an incredibly thoughtful person, being able to take some of those experiences as an athlete and be able to pass it along to the next generation of people trying to achieve great things, not only in the sport of rowing, but basically in any facet of life. We talk about a lot of different topics here. I think we can probably have Lindsay on a couple more times and not be able to really scratch the surface on all that she's done. She's an incredible person, very, very thoughtful in the way that she comes across with her message. We hope you guys enjoy this one and get a glimpse into the life of an Olympic champion.
But yeah, Lindsay, that looks like a good writing room to me right there.
I just finished telling my brother that I said, man, I could write a lot of books down here because it's so quiet.
Good.
Nephews are back in actual school. No,
Yeah.
So it makes a big difference.
Yeah, maybe not while they're in there, that's for sure.
Yeah, because I like to talk, it runs in the family.
Chad, you want to start it up or do you want me to?
Go ahead, yeah.
All right. Lindsay, are you all set, ready to go?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Well, Lindsay,
As I know.
thank you so much for jumping on the podcast with me and Chad today. We appreciate you having on. How you doing?
Fantastically well. It's always wonderful to see you guys. To be
Good,
honest.
good.
Yeah.
We just came off our Power Monkey camp a few weeks ago, so we actually did get the chance to see you in person, and we did some interesting new things with our Olympic stories that Chad threw out there, which I think was a really great way for us to get to know each other's stories a little bit more deeply. And I think it would be a good place for us to maybe start today, just to hear a little bit about your Olympic journey. You know, we speak a lot with CrossFitters and people in the fitness world, and I don't really know if you do a lot of CrossFit. So, maybe you might be a little bit new to a lot of our listeners outside of our Power Monkey camp. So would you mind just telling as briefly as you can, because I know it's long and complex, but just a little bit of the background, kind of the end result of, how amazing your story is and ending with that gold medal and a few other amazing accomplishments along the way. But would you mind just giving a little bit of a background in terms of your athletic career?
Yeah. Super short. When I was a kid, played probably a dozen different sports all the way up through high school. But when I left high school, I was insecure. Honestly, I didn't think that I was good enough to play a sport in college. Ultimately left sports behind for about 2.5 years until I very serendipitously, that's the short version, very serendipitously bumped into the head rowing coach while on campus at the University of Virginia. And he took one look at me and said, you're tall, you should think about rowing. And it was the right place, right time for me in my life to have that opportunity enter. And I took him up on it. I was completely novice, knew nothing about the sport, was not very good at it in the very beginning, and then took it one step at a time until I made it to the national team within 3 years of picking up the sport. I was sitting at the start line of my first world championships wearing my Team USA uniform.
Wow.
And then the very next year after that, won a world championships with my teammates and set the world record in our event, which was the women's 8 in rowing. And then we basically set up a streak of 11 straight years of the United States winning the U.S. women's 8 in rowing, all the way at the World Championships, at the Olympics, and we're now in the U.S. Rowing Hall of Fame.
Being able to sum all of that up in a 2-3 minute is absolutely incredible. We could dive, I'm sure, just into one of those World Championships or one of those Olympic Games and do a whole podcast just on that. But there's something interesting there that I want to touch on and just start the podcast off with. Because even, discussing it a little bit, how you have it written out in your book, the circumstances that led to you finding the sport. And I think sometimes people get the impression that being an elite athlete means that you have to do it from the day you were born and you grow up finding this sport. It's what you dedicate your entire life to, and that's it. You're obsessed with this sport from the day you were born. And maybe that's the case sometimes, or in gymnastics, you know, kids are starting at a fairly young age, setting that foundation and then going on. Weightlifting happens a little bit later. Chad, how old were you when you started? 10, 11, something like that?
Oh, not even that. I mean, Olympic lifting, I didn't even know what a snatch or clean and jerk was until I was 15.
15. So
So,
a little bit later in life, you know, at that point, female gymnast careers are just about over.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And you know, he's just finding it. And your career was fairly interesting in that you got to college, you got to UVA, and the coach just looked at you and said, "You're tall, you might be great for this sport."
Yeah.
Now, that's kind of interesting because I remember walking around Stanford's campus and there was similar kind of things happening with trying to find athletes for the rowing team as well. Are you tall? Can you wake up early? These are like the two prerequisites.
Oh, I fell on both
I'm
of
not a
those
morning
then.
person.
I remember posters around campus like, "Can you wake up at 5 a.m? We got a sport for you." It's like, okay. But my question has to do with circumstances and access.
Yeah.
Because do you feel like, and it sounds like you do, but that the sport almost found you? And, you know, were you even aware of rowing prior to the coach coming up to you and saying this could be something in your wheelhouse? Or was it something that purely found you and then you found a love for it from that point?
Yeah, I mean, growing up where I did, rowing was not a thing. Like it didn't exist. I played a bazillion different sports. Basketball was kind of the most common. All the kids in my local town swam in the summertime on, for the summer league swim team. Rowing was nowhere on my radar until that same coach. He actually approached me when I was in high school and said, "Hey, he knew that I played basketball. He knew I didn't plan to play basketball in college." Again, to go back to the insecurity of like, what you're talking about. Oh, to play basketball at a place like the University of Virginia, I would need to be 6'5" and run very, and I just didn't have those things in my wheelhouse, so to speak, at the time. So he said, "Hey, you should think about rowing." And that was the first time. I even remember filling out my little SAT bubble saying, "Oh, crew is an interest of mine." I didn't know anything about it.
Sure.
You do that, you get mail about rowing for like, like just start showing up at your door. But I knew nothing about it. And it was this opportunity that he kind of said, "Hey, you should think about rowing." The fact that it was at a Division I college, and the fact that I did know through some of our small interactions that UVA happened to be one of the 4 best teams in the country, that was also pretty daunting to go, "Oh, all right." I mean, so my image of athletes is exactly as you said, where to be excellent, you had to be really good from a young age. You had to start really early. But there were other characteristics that I had honed through not specializing that really helped me in the sport. The biggest one being the teamwork aspect of it. There are no superstars in rowing. And if you try to be a superstar, you can actually make the team slower. And I think that is why it really fit for me, was that I had always preferred team sports, and I had really latched onto that in a lot of different settings. And not only that, the way the University of Virginia was set up is that that coach in particular, who was the only head coach they've ever had, the entire model of the team is that the team is the most important thing. Even at the NCAA level, it's not about the individual votes. It's, can we win the team championship? So the fact that this man happened to be at this school that happened to be 20 minutes away from where I grew up, that was the school that I ended up going to for academic reasons. It was the right fit, right place, right time, and even, if you look at my timeline, because I started late in the sport, I was 20 when I started, I still had NCAA eligibility, which moved my graduation year from 2003 to 1 year of graduate school, which had me finishing in college in 2004, which allowed me to enter the United States National Team Training Center right at the end of an Olympic cycle. So I entered at basically the farthest point from the next Olympic Games possible. So that right there is an opportunity and timing that just kind of was set up. That was, a lot of it really was right place, right time.
Yeah. I find these kind of stories to be really interesting because my story is kind of like that too, in terms of being at the right place at the right time. Men's gymnastics is not the kind of sport that has tons of access and tons of gyms around the country. And I grew up just lucky enough to be within walking distance of one of the best men's programs in the entire country.
Mm-hmm.
And I just find that to be interesting, that the access and the ability can sometimes turn, you know, what might just be kind of a fleeting sport or a
Mm-hmm.
fleeting idea to be good at something into a career. And it comes back to this idea of access and like, are we missing out on, and this is a longer conversation, but I always find it fascinating that, are we missing out on a ton of potential superstar athletes because of lack of access
Mm-hmm.
and lack of ability to be able to say, hey, this is a sport that I might be amazing at, but I never had that same person come up to me in the way that you did, Lindsay, to say,
Mm-hmm.
you would be great at this.
Mm-hmm.
And when I hear stories, I'm like, what is there something that we can do? And I'm just going off on a tangent, but thinking about, some of the scholarship winners that came to camp and giving them access to be able to see sport in a new way, and next generation being able to get in front of the coaches that maybe that they wouldn't have otherwise. Have you ever thought about like other ways to be able to get access to other people for your specific sport and say, hey, you know what? It was really lucky that I actually came in contact with this person at the right place, right time.
Mm-hmm.
I know that if I did the same thing for the next generation, I'd be able to provide the same type of opportunity for them.
Yeah. I that's what I love about coaching, and the longer that I've coached, the more I've realized, people always say like, oh, just because you're an Olympic athlete doesn't mean you'd be a good coach. And that's very true, and access to great coaching. You don't necessarily need the best equipment or the best facilities, but to have a role model and to have someone that cares about you, when that supersedes the notion of success being the win column, literally checking the box of whether you won that game or not, having access to a person that is going to put themselves out there to connect with you, to prioritize, like, my gosh, I had this incredible opportunity, how can I set this up for someone else? Again, it's one, I even write about this in a book where my college coach, everything that has since gone really, really right in my life since that turning point, I really trace back to him as a human being and his personality, where he sees opportunity all around him, and that has since been passed down to me. And it is a hard question because rowing is not an inexpensive sport, even if you get hand-me-down equipment that's 20 years old. And then you have to get people to a body of water, which is what I do love about how CrossFit uses the rowing machine. There's so much that that can be kind of like the gateway, right? Like that's the first step is, can we do technical things on the rowing machine? Those are much more accessible. You can reach more people through the sport with one machine that costs, honestly, something. If you were to buy like the tippy top expensive boat, one rowing machine is like 1/60th the cost of some of the most expensive equipment out there, So I know that people that run clubs, they often look at it as how much does one seat cost? And that's how they price out the equipment that they're going to use and how many people they can provide access to at a time. I have some friends that run the rowing program in Chicago, the Chicago Rowing Foundation, and they do a lot of work with accessibility and reaching new communities and these sorts of things. And it's something that U.S. Rowing is working very hard to do, because it is, above all the sports that I played that I would say are more field and ball oriented, which you guys are both not in field and ball sports. So I'd be interested to see what your perspective is on this, is that the incremental improvements that you can own through the type of sport that rowing is, it's just more developmental, or at least it was for me, from like a human element. I grew more through the sport of rowing than through some of the other sports that I was involved in, because I was able to own the progress of that. I know that goes on a tangent past your question of accessibility, but it's like a reason for why this sport in particular, we should be really focusing on access, and I like to say that, when you do the right things, the winning takes care of itself. So when we prioritize passing down these things as role models to people, then all the rest of the stuff starts to, go well too.
Yeah.
Well, to your point, Lindsay, you talk about it being kind of progressive, and you were able to grow more as a person and an athlete because you could see those incremental improvements, the same as weightlifting. I'm sure the same as gymnastics as well. But I mean, I can obviously see that I lifted more weight. I can
Mm-hmm.
feel the difference in my positions and everything else. And I think, if you were exposed to that at a younger age, Lindsay, maybe you would have had, I want to go back to confidence. Maybe you would have had more confidence to play a sport in college, which would have changed your life. I mean, you may not have been an Olympic gold medalist. And it really makes me think about meant to be's, right? Meant to be's
Mm-hmm.
and the timing of everything. Cause the same for me, I had weightlifting that I was doing just on somewhat of a random basis in high school. Had a young coach move in that was teaching us the lifts as he was learning them. And we did that for my sophomore, junior, and senior year. My senior year, he took me to a competition and I won that first competition. And, along that time, as I was heading towards graduation, I desperately wanted to continue playing football. I wanted to play football, try to play football in college, walk on it at a small college nearby, but I didn't have the confidence to do that. I thought there's no
Mm-hmm.
way, looking back, I'm like, man, you could have absolutely done that. I mean,
Yeah.
look what you did as a weightlifter. You ended up being an Olympian. You could have played football in college, but I didn't have the confidence.
Yeah.
So weightlifting was there. So I just took to it and I kept going with that. I kept getting stronger and things kind of seemingly fell in my lap through that process. But it just makes me think, how many people out there, how many kids could play college sports that don't
Mm-hmm.
have the confidence to, and they may be able to do very well, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword because, them making the decision not to do it through the lack of confidence has led them to whatever else they're doing
Yeah. Yeah.
in their life, so it's just it's an interesting thought. And we're talking about accessibility. Well, yeah, that's all true, but maybe it's just a matter of us as humans doing the best we can to put out information that we love, to expose our sports as much as possible,
Mhm.
and just kind of let things happen the way that they're going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I say I've come to start saying that if anything were different, everything would be different, because it's
Mm,
exactly that. Like if you were
Mhm.
to change it, if you were to
Yeah.
go back and have this happen at a different point,
sure.
maybe it was that it became developmental for me because I was ready for it to be
Mhm.
developmental for me. The night before I bumped into the head rowing coach at UVA, I literally woke up in the middle of the night and wrote in my journal, and this is in the book, right?
Mhm.
I wish I can actually, let me flip to it, and that way I don't flub it up here, but I literally wrote, like, this is the night before, a matter of hours before I bumped into this man, that the closing lines were, and now that I am where I am, I wish a thing or two were different. I wish I had done crew. I wish I were not a lazy bum. Then I may have actually been something. The world will
Hmm.
never know. And that includes me, And
Wow.
so lo and behold, the next day I bump into this man and he says, hey, it's never too
I
late
read your
to
journal last
grow.
night.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I read your mind.
Well, do you guys think, I mean, you know, without trying to dig too much into supernatural things, do you guys
Mm,
believe in things like putting stuff out in the universe and it kind of comes back to you? Because that's what it sounds like. I mean, and even for me, growing up watching the Olympics, always loving the Olympics, and I hate to admit that probably my favorite thing to watch back then was gymnastics. I mean, I hate to admit that,
love it.
but it really, really was.
Yes.
Dominic
You know,
Dawes, she was
and
tall.
She's
oh yeah,
amazing. She's
Oh
yeah,
my
amazing.
gosh. Yeah.
absolutely. But
Tall, relative term,
yeah,
tall.
But
I looked forward to it.
she looked very
Watched
tall.
it every 4 years. I wish it was on all the time. It was something that I just truly loved, and
Yeah.
I had thoughts. Even back then, not very much confidence, and it was just a silly thought to me. But I was just thinking, I would love to be able to go to the Olympics, but I didn't see
Mhm.
any sports that I thought would take me there. I loved football, so I was like, maybe someday football will be in the Olympics and I can try something. But I was always thinking of that, and I was always thinking, what sport could I potentially go to the Olympics in? What sport is it? Where is it?
Mhm.
And so I was always thinking that, and it just seemingly like maybe that was putting something out in the universe, and then weightlifting supernaturally fell into my lap.
Chad, I love that you said putting information out there about the things that we love, and that creates an accessibility. And I never really thought about it like that. Just talk more about these sports that people don't necessarily know a lot about, which again goes back to what I love about the fact that in CrossFit, the rowing machine is such has become such a prevalent element. It's like it is putting rowing out there, which is just this incredible thing. I love that comment.
Yeah, I think that's for all of our sports, right? It's one of the things what kind of made Chad and I just love CrossFit so much is people's sudden interest in something that, we've devoted our lives to, and said, there's been a lot of people within each of our sports that have said, oh my God, what are they doing to our movements? Like, why are they doing 100 snatches in a row? Like, why would you ever do that? Or why are you trying to do like 30 muscle ups and like then doing it so ugly with a swing? And Chad and I always had the mentality
do something about it.
They're doing our sport.
They're
this is incredible. Like we've tried so hard and for so long to get people to be interested in the niche sport of gymnastics or niche sport of weightlifting outside of 2 weeks every 4 years when the Olympics rolls around. And CrossFit has allowed that. It's put rings in people's gyms and in people's homes, and it's got people inverted. And it's put, rowing machines in gyms all over the world. Like this is an opportunity for us to grow this sport and to grow interest and get the next generation interested through their parents. Why not look at it as an opportunity? And I think rowing falls right into that same type of mentality, because now people are understanding the mechanics of rowing and what goes into it. And maybe it'll make some people click and say, hey, this is fun to do it on land, but I'm right down from the water, and let me see if I can get into a boat one day and test out the difference between actually rowing and testing out on a machine. So I can only see the sport growing in the same way it's helped gymnastics and weightlifting.
Yeah, let me just say, we just announced the weightlifting Olympic team for this year. Well, it's the 2020 Olympic team. It's so weird to say that it's 2021, but it's the 2020 Olympic team. But at least
trials.
at least five of the eight, there's 4 men, 4 women. At least 5 of the 8 are weightlifters because of CrossFit, because of that accessibility that created. They either started as a CrossFitter, or were introduced because maybe 1 or 2 of them, their parents were doing CrossFit, and so they kind of fell into the weightlifting part of it. But it's just amazing, this opportunity that it's created for all of us, and to really put it into perspective of at least, and I'm saying at least because I'm not sure that 1 or 2 of those other ones weren't introduced through CrossFit in some way, but at least 5 of 8 of the Olympians for weightlifting are there because of CrossFit. And it'll be interesting to see in the future if that ends up being with any gymnast. I'm not sure that that's the case right now. I don't think that they're there yet. As far as we are in weightlifting, it'll be interesting to see if there's any rowers that come out of it. I don't know. I think that'll be a little bit harder than weightlifting, but it's certainly possible. The longer that CrossFit goes on and the more people are exposed, the more parents that are exposed to all these different sports and kind of find a talent for them themselves and see that their kids are going to have some potential there as well. It's just going to be interesting.
Yeah, I can actually speak to that. There is an award in the ACC conference, and the ACC newcomer, it used to be the freshman, but it's the newcomer. I actually just did the voiceover for the ACC championships last week, and the newcomer actually came to rowing because of CrossFit. She found the rowing machine, developed some numbers, and there are certain metrics that you can use, and then of course you have to hone the technical skill in the boat from what you learn. But again, to look at it as an opportunity to go, how can we row better, be more efficient? We always trained technically on the machine. It wasn't just pull a number, it was row the erg, and to carry that mentality into my coaching and what I do, but also to bring it in and grow the importance of it within the CrossFit community. You can have that crossover. I personally know of at least a handful of people that have come to rowing because of being exposed to the machine itself through another means, which is awesome. I mean,
amazing.
That again, right, more than, to bring it full circle, to go back to what you mentioned, Chad, about the Olympics, watching it growing up, like that was the 2 weeks every couple of years when they finally separated winter and summer games. Now you get it every 2 years, to be exposed to these sports that exist, but don't exist in the limelight, for the vast majority of the time. And to have another way to create awareness, to raise awareness, which then ultimately increases interest, which then drives, the accessibility, because there's a value involved in all of these things.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like rowing definitely can start to create, CrossFit can start to potentially create some higher level rowers that go on to just that sport specific world. I think it's going to take a long time before that happens gymnastics, but I wouldn't say that's out of realm of possibility. CrossFit is still very much in its infancy, being maybe a little over a decade old in terms of its worldwide influence. But, give it a couple of decades and more kids doing CrossFit Kids and in the gym with their parents and hanging on rings and being on bar work, and then saying, hey, this is the part of the sport that I really enjoy, and going to find a gymnastics gym. I wouldn't be surprised if we say that there's an Olympian in 2032 or something like that started off in CrossFit. So
I don't think it's that far away. I really don't. I mean, because
Yeah.
there's been parents putting their kids in gymnastics through CrossFit for at least 5 years now.
Yeah.
Some of them
Yeah.
even more.
Sure.
So I think we'll see an Olympian that was, introduced through CrossFit from their parents putting them in a gymnastics gym probably as early as 2024, maybe not that, 2028 at least. I think.
I had a parent, actually, a former camper, reach out to me this week. Power Monkey camper reach out to me. He's a box owner, and he has a daughter who's 10, 11 years old. That's potentially on the road to becoming a high level gymnast. Not tall, no. She's trying to become that gymnast. That next Simone Biles. She's a huge fan of what Simone's doing, and it's like, a box owner that her exposure to the sport was through her dad's owning of a gym. So yeah, maybe you're right, Chad. Maybe it's going to happen a little bit more quickly than we anticipate. But Lindsay, I want to go back to something else you mentioned. First, I think it would be appropriate to mention the name of your coach, since he seems to have been such a huge influence. You want to give him a little bit of shout out? And is he still coaching at UVA right now?
He is the only head coach that the women's rowing program has ever had. He moved.
Oh, wow.
1988. He's one of the few that has been at the same program. And so it is literally his baby, and Kevin Sauer. He rowed on the national team himself. He has actually designed and put in Olympic rowing courses for a couple of Atlanta, and I can't remember if he also did LA, but he definitely did Atlanta. But he's been involved with rowing worldwide. He actually coached the women's double for the 2016 games. He was one of the coaches that for the 2016 games. So
very cool.
Kevin Sauer.
Well, obviously he had a huge impact on your career, the creation of your career, and the kind of inception of the whole idea that you could be a rower. But one of the things that you mentioned that he kind of instilled in you is the importance of team, and being a rower wasn't about an individual, it was about being part of that eight. Yeah. And in your book, you've mentioned
team, even beyond the
right,
itself. Yeah.
Right. One of the things you mentioned in the book is your relationship growing up with your brother, and how him being older and exposing you to being around boys and sports through him. Was that kind of the first initiation into, being involved in kind of a team type atmosphere, being around him and his friends and being exposed to sport through that? And then did that help you develop into a more of understanding what team was once you got to college?
I think because we were always like this group of kids, the games that we played, we made up on our own, and that was definitely something I carried even into elementary school. We made up the rules, we made up games. It's what kids do. And so you're part of this collective unit. And me, being the only girl pretty much growing up, you're like, of course I can do that. So you're like running as fast as you can. You also figure out very early what you can be better at. So you're like, I will not be bigger than my brother, so I must be mentally more cunning. How can I throw zingers through the words that I say and then run away really, really fast? Fast is relative because I was never fast. I used to hate running. Like when I was a kid, you're playing in the yard, you're not thinking about it as being running. But when it became running in the context of like running on the field, then I was like, this is.
Oh, you and Chad have some similarities there.
Very much.
But yeah, it really is a good point that you bring up about being a part of that team. I almost drowned in a lake when I was 2. So then my parents put my brother and me in swimming lessons at a very young age. And so I was really immersed in this kind of youth sport group environment at a pretty young age. And so then even when you weren't in your sports, having grown up in the country, you're still doing things with groups of kids, and I've actually since wondered if you were to survey, the United States Olympic Committee or any Olympic committee in any country and look at their Olympic athletes, do they have what proportion of Olympic athletes have older siblings? And like, is that maybe like a helpful thing where you're like, I'm keeping up with the group that's older, or are
that's
you
super interesting?
Yeah. Right.
Or I'd be interested to hear how many only children I have an only child, so it's just comes to mind. But I mean, I can see some benefits in that as well. I can see benefits both ways for sure.
I was also being tall. People always thought I was older than I was. So then in some of my sports, I would, like in swimming, for instance, you have age groups. I would always be put in the next age group up because we needed more people. And I was kind of, because I was bigger, I was usually a little bit faster in certain things. So then I was used to racing up. So kind of keeping up with, I was at the bottom end of the next group up usually, which kind of dragged me forward too. That's my reflection on that now, is like, maybe that contributed.
Right. And so when you got to college and you became part of this team, there was a natural fit. And I mean, I used to watch the rowers train. They used to train in the same gym as us. They were, at Stanford, we had Ford Center. They've since built a new rowing facility. And just to mention, rowing was dropped by Stanford
Men's.
a couple of months ago, men's, and it was just brought back last week.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So huge news that Stanford did drop 11 sports, but they brought them all back. So great news on that. But they used to train right in front of us. We had a big glass wall and we used to watch them row. And I was always curious about the roles. Like, are there different roles within the team of 8? We know the coxswain kind of basically dictates as kind of the orchestrator, right? He's the conductor of, he or she is the conductor of what's going on. But can you tell us a little bit about the roles that you each play within that, and how what was your role in terms of making sure the team succeeded?
Yeah, it's funny because I've actually at different world championships and the Olympics, I've raced in several different seats, 2, 4, 6, 7, and 8. So 2, 4, 6, and 7, like 4 or 5 different seats. So in each of those races, I, in theory, played a different role. So for the 8 specifically, you have the coxswain, who is the smallest person. Imagine driving a 60-foot long car and not being able to see where you're going, but trying to go perfectly straight, but having 8 variables constantly changing, let alone the wind and the water conditions. That is mind blowing to me. I'm like, oh, she can't predict if someone's going to be a little bit off from one stroke to the next. And if you're a little off, you can actually change the direction of the boat accidentally. So they have to be able to respond to that. So at the minimum, the coxswain is going to drive as straight as possible and keep you safe. Those are your number 1 rules. Safety first, drive straight second, and then all the nuances build from there in terms of the layers of their role. They keep us organized would kind of be the most basic way to put that beyond those 2 things. The people facing her, so you have the coxswain looking in the direction that you're actually moving, that you're racing. The 2 people facing her are going to be your stern pair, and they're the ones that have like a really fantastic rhythm. They have the most efficient way of actually rowing that makes everybody else in the boat faster, because the way that they're doing it is just efficient. But I don't know a better word to put it other than that. At every rate too. Some people can be incredibly efficient in a certain range, like for certain types of training, but not others. Some people can only be good on racing, but when you really find a fantastic stern pair, they're going to be the pair that really can fill all the gaps at all types of training. The 2 people behind them are 2 of the fastest, I shouldn't say fastest, strongest on the rowing machine. So literally physically tallest and strongest people in the boat. And they can basically take an efficient rhythm and make it even more solid by adding power to that. The 2 people behind them are also strong and powerful, but need a little bit more technical guidance is kind of how that works. And then the 2 people behind them are usually the smaller athletes that are the most technically savvy, because the boat changes the most in that position because it comes up and down out of the water. And so they have to have a really good boat feel, because they have a huge impact on the stability of the boat. And if the boat is not stable and it's moving around, it makes everybody else's job a whole lot harder. So yeah. And it's really interesting, because I remember when I was in college, our coach was trying to figure out, Kevin Sauer, trying to figure out where everyone needed to sit. I sat in like 5 different seats in a single practice. It's amazing how different the boat can feel just by sitting with the same people, but you're literally in a different physical location in the boat. Yeah.
That's
like
amazing.
Chessboard.
That is just in a nutshell. There's so many other nuances to it, but just the fact that like the bow of the boat is literally the part that raises and lowers. So the distance to the water is different every single stroke that you take.
Yeah, I want to draw that out and just, jot down what you just said there, because I think there's so many good analogies perhaps that I can
Mhm.
come up with for weightlifting or for coaching in CrossFit in some way. That's to hear you lay it out like that, that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, so your role changed quite a bit throughout that those years. Where did
Yeah.
you feel most comfortable?
I used to be afraid of the bow pair because I knew how much impact the bow pair had on the stability of the boat. And everybody knew it. Like if you got
Mhm.
into to those two seats and you were not good at it, it would impact everybody,
Mhm.
And so being back there, I was just like, oh, can't mess this up for people, and it was really interesting because I remember when I first got put there thinking, I was really focused on myself, like, okay, do this right, do this right, do this right, do this right. And sometimes what happens initially is you back off on your power a little bit to focus on the technique. When really, when you're doing it really well, then you can't get enough power on it. You're like, you find the lack, and that you're almost like the training wheels for the whole
Mm.
boat. I've really enjoyed sitting in a lot of seats, but that one was probably my favorite, sitting in the bow pair, because of that, because you're
Mm.
like, this is my role. You can see everyone in front of you. You can see how much work they're putting into it, how focused they are, And yeah, I think that I learned the most from a technical standpoint there, which would only make me better in any of the other seats. And that's probably
Right.
what I
Mm.
liked the most about that spot.
Where did you sit when you won
In two
in
seat
'08?
in the
Oh,
bow
you did.
pair. And
Okay.
that
Nice.
All
might
right.
have a little something to do with it,
Yeah.
All
because at
right.
that point, that's like the best lineup that you're ever in your whole life.
Right.
So any seat in a boat that fast is amazing.
That's
Mhm.
awesome. That's awesome. Um, it sounds like it from what you described to this point. If you look at your career highlights, it was a string of success. It was golds at all these world championships, leading into an Olympic gold medal, into another world championship in 2009. It doesn't seem like there was a lot of, from the outside perspective, a lot of struggle or a lot of challenge. I'm sure there was. There always is.
Yeah.
There's always an incredible amount of struggle that goes along with the amount of success that the end user sees and just is able to see those golds. But is there something that really sticks out to you as a challenge that you were able to overcome, to maybe one of those world championships that really stood out that was more challenging to get to than the other, or maybe that gold in Beijing, but something specific from a struggle standpoint?
I would say well, gosh, there were so many. And that's why I
Yeah,
wrote the book, right? They're just because
sure.
that's exactly what, because people see the things that you can do the Wikipedia search. It's like, oh,
Right.
Mhm.
there it is, and there's the chart. But like twice a week, every week, losing all the time,
Hmm.
the something that I didn't know about until the Olympic year or so was that my college coach came to a practice and rode along with the national team coach very early on in my training with the national team. And during that ride along, the national team coach shared with my college coach that he didn't think it was going to work out for me because I was struggling. I was at the bottom of
Mm.
the heap. At the time, the heap was only 7 people. Nevertheless, I was at the bottom of the heap. So I almost didn't make it out of the first couple of months that I trained with the national team, you know. And within that first couple of months, my performance on the rowing machine had stagnated. It was literally like to the tenth of a second the same for 3 or 4 straight months. And lo and behold, a few months later, all of a sudden, I was one of the top 6 athletes in the country,
Mm.
and technically top two sweepers. So sweeper being 1 oar per person instead of sculler, which is 2 oars per person. So I went from literally being, I don't know if it's going to work out for her, to being racing 2 events at my first world championships and being a priority athlete on the US national team. And so that kind of encompasses, like, when I say every week, twice a week, you go from that to that. And that is literally how it kind of felt a lot of time, because you're
Hmm.
constantly trying to figure out, how can I get a percentage faster? Because we did all of our speeds after our first year on percentages of gold medal time standard. So you're constantly seeking for more percentages of speed. And every time you get a new partner, because we constantly changed partners. So right when you're getting a foothold, you get a new partner and you kind of backpedal a little bit, and then you gain a foothold and then you backpedal a little bit. And that was really the nature of it. The other kind of up and down that would encompass it is Imagine doing all of that racing, all those pieces for years on end. Nobody knows except you and your teammates. And then when it comes down to final selection, the way that we were chosen for seat racing for final selection was based on a series of criteria. Because I wasn't the tallest, because I had a solid erg for my size, but I was physically smaller than other people. So that enabled them to have a faster erg score. All these little things that factored in, I was the one that got seat raced. And so imagine all of that you've done, and then it comes down to this one race. And if you lose, then you're going to be raced again. And if you lose again, it is likely that everything you've done is for naught and you're taken out of the boat. So you switch places with one person, you race, you have no idea how fast the boat went without you. And all you're thinking is, did it go faster? Was it better? Hopefully when we get back, it was faster when I was in the boat, because then, and that right there is, you have that moment, you're like, what can I do but take the strokes, row back to the dock, know that you did absolutely everything you could. And that is it. Like, this is the most important race of my life, and you push yourself as hard as you possibly can, because if you don't, someone else will find more than you did. And if that's the case, then they probably deserve to sit there and you don't, because the Olympics is the hardest thing you will have ever done in your athletic career. Like, it is literally going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. And just to get there, you have to go through an awful lot. And I mean, now that I say it's the hardest thing you've ever done, the training is the hardest thing you've ever done just to get there.
So those practices are in twos, right? You're saying that you're in pairs for a lot of that?
Most of the practices, most of the training that we actually did was in pairs. And every now and again, you get into a bigger boat, either being a 4 or an 8, possibly a double if you're rowing a single. But then the final selection happens in the 8. So you literally race a piece against the clock, get taken out of the boat, someone else gets in, you race a piece against the clock.
Wow.
Yep. And that's why I say you have no idea. They're not next to you. So you are forced to be completely intrinsically motivated at that point. Fold in with these athletes, these women that I'm sitting in this boat with, and go, because you're racing an imaginary competitor. And that's it. You get one shot, off you go.
Wow. That's fascinating. It really is like a big chessboard. It seems like, who's the best fit for this, and how many girls are possibly in that pool that they're switching in and out to come up with the final 8.
Yeah. I mean, and in the Olympic year, by the time that you're in final selection, it boils down to about 12 or so people for 8 spots at that point, once they've been siphoned down. But that does come into play. Are you better in an 8, or are you better in a pair or a 4? So some people are just better in different types of boats too. So that's something that comes into play.
Just one last question on this subject. With the 2s and 4s, are they less complex because there's less variables to play with, less people in the boat than the 8? It seems like that one is the most challenging, the most that could potentially go wrong, but also the most sophisticated.
So the 8 has more variables involved. However, because it's a bigger boat, it's more stable. So in the smaller boats, they're far less stable, which means everything you do, you get immediate feedback as to how efficient and effective you are being. So you learn a lot more. And so you become much more technically savvy, which ultimately makes you more efficient, which is why we trained so much in those small boats, so that when you do get into the 8, you're like, feels like I'm on a rowing machine. Right. Like, this thing, it's not going anywhere, And
there's no coxswain in 2 and 4, right? So there's no guidance.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You're steering with your foot. You literally have a rudder attached to a cable, and you're turning your foot while you're rowing. Yep.
All right.
Behind you, you're keeping track of all the things. Yeah.
All right. So you got to give it up to 2s and 4s too. They got a lot going on as well.
Yes.
So
all of them.
And the 2 and the 4, is there just one driver, I assume? As far as like the one,
just one person has the shoe. Yeah. And in the boat with 2 people, when it's a sweep boat, so 1 oar per person, it's a pair. So it's a pair of people and a pair of oars. And then if you're 2 people in a sculling event, which is 2 oars per person, is called a double. So it's 2 people, 4 oars. But yeah, in the pair and in the 4, only one person has like a shoe that moves with the rudder and everything. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to be extra interested to watch the rowing this year. I normally always do
Yes!
watch it. Yeah. I normally always do watch a little bit of it, but awesome.
Lindsay's doing the commentary for it. For
I'll
NBC
be the rowing analyst.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, and tentatively, I don't even know if I should say this yet, but tentatively, Cheryl will be announcing for the weightlifting.
Hopefully,
so
we will
Power Monkey coaches. It'll be It'll be amazing. But I could ask you questions on that for another couple hours. I think it's very interesting, but I want to talk a little bit about uh, teaching and coaching rowing in CrossFit. I mean, come on, why not, right? Just
Yeah, yeah.
a few questions here because, as you kind of broke into the CrossFit community and you started understanding that you're going to have to relate to these people probably in a little bit of a different way. What at this point do you find yourself comparing rowing to the most, just from any other discipline that's in CrossFit or any other sport, and just one or two of the most common cues or concepts that you use?
Yeah, so one of my favorite things about it is that it is something that I've started doing with rowing coaches to help other coaches be better, because there's only one of me, honestly,
Right.
is having gone through and done my master's in exercise physiology, being able to look at it in terms of levers, loads, and mechanical efficiency, which is like a lot of the lifts that get used all the time. So, we have so much common crossover in conversation when you're talking about snatches and clean and jerk and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, yes, it's all the same things. Just change your perspective on what it looks like. What is rowing? Just take an erg and, stand it up on end and do the same motion. It's, bend over, stand back up. So it does have a lot of similarities to the clean, right? Or the high pull, depending on what you call it, because you're not racking it, obviously.
Right.
But it's not as slow and heavy. A lot of people have said I've heard it be equated to the deadlift or to a clean. And I would say lightweight repeat cleans or repeat box jumps, because there is a little more agility involved, because it's more of a continuous cycle rather than one rep down, one rep down. So think about it as when we would train, we would do 4x40 lightweight cleans as part of an endurance lift circuit that we would do. Because that gets your heart rate up. You're kind of moving in a similar way. You're focused on, hip extension, not full. Obviously, you're never laid down fully. But yeah, that's something that I would definitely equate it to. It is like a clean, but not a heavy clean. It's more like a lightweight clean that you could continuously cycle. I mean, imagine doing 200 in 6 minutes.
Did you say 4x40? Is that what I heard?
4x40.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And the reason why, having gone through the physiology of it, it defies the science. The science will be like, oh my God, you're going to get hurt. All the more reason to be technically savvy, right? Make sure your joints are in the right spots. Don't put yourself in these positions. Don't bend over at the hip. You would never pick up your giant FedEx box that Rogue just delivered to your house by bending over just at the hip with your back bent. No, you set yourself up. I would say the biggest difference, not to make a very long point out of your question, is that there's not a brace element involved, in rowing. You have to be able to be in those positions, but be relaxed in that position to kind of hit the stretch shortening cycle and turn the thing right back around. Imagine that moment where the weight might actually touch the ground, but you're already ready to pick it back up before it even touches the ground.
Yeah, and I don't see anything wrong with a set of 40 other than I don't want to do it, as long as you are technically sound. Absolutely. And that's the big point of, with what we try to get across to everyone with CrossFit. There's too many athletes that are just going for, grace, 30 reps, 30 clean and jerks for time with like what I like to call a rounded back Romanian deadlift muscle clean into a push press. So we want to get you as efficient as you can, so you're more effective. You can ultimately get a better time, but you can also sustain and have a better chance for health and longevity. But I love that comparison to that specific task of low weight, high rep cleans. I love that. I think it's perfect. With that,
when can I say with that, when I say lightweight, that's exactly how you select the weight is. How can I stay technically solid? Like what allows me to keep the quickness at the bottom, like to keep it as a cycle, right? But also where I'm not doing exactly as you described with the bent back, rounded back Romanian deadlifts that it has to be technically solid. And that's your breaking point. If you break down within 10 or 20 of those 40 reps and your technique is gone, the weight's too heavy, right? Either that or your cueing is wrong and the technique isn't there in the first place.
And that should be with anything. That's exactly what we want. We want a progression in load only after you're technically sound with the weight that you're using, and
Yeah.
that's the problem, is that people get ahead of themselves and their mindset is load over movement. And
Yeah.
that's what Power Monkey's all about.
Mhm.
Technique matters is the slogan there. And that's what we're trying to get across. Do it right. No, don't only do it right a million times or whatever that number is.
Mhm.
And then you can add a little bit of weight, because it just makes so much sense to me that if you as a rower can slowly increase that load that you're using for 4x40 reps,
Mhm.
then you're going to be that much better
Mhm.
when you're out there on the water rowing. So just keep that in mind. I think that's a really good comparison. Now, within all that, let's say one or two, what are the two most common faults that you see with athletes in the CrossFit community while they're on the rowing machine?
The biggest one, and this is actually common for all people that row, is back extending against the legs,
Mm,
instantly opening. Ooh, let me not
mm,
pull my computer off here, but
mhm.
instantly opening the back rather than using the legs. Figuring out
Okay.
how to use your legs and having that be the dominant muscle, like everything from the belly button down, I will say, will be legs, because you need to be able to support it through the middle. Because when you do instantly back extend, that's your body looking to take the slack out so that
Mhm,
you can create the
mhm,
tension, right? But if you're back extending, then you're putting a lot of pressure on your lumbar spine, right?
mhm,
Right in the L4, L5, L5S1 area. So what'll naturally happen is it'll force your legs to stall out. So your legs get slower as your body opens in order to literally not cause an injury. Like, it
mhm,
is a survival mechanism, and it happens all the time. Coaches will say, well, why are their legs stalling out? Well, because they're working against, right? And
mhm,
if you look at the taller, bigger athletes have an easier time drawing bigger numbers. That is the nature of mass. That's how it works,
mhm,
especially on the rowing machine. But if you're we're all if you're an adult, you're fully grown. However tall you are is how tall you are. So if you can figure out how to push your legs, and then once those are almost
mhm.
done, then unwind, you've now created a longer stroke, and you can apply power over a longer period of time, which will also give you a better number
So
on the erg and on the water.
what you're saying is, just like a clean, you need to have an initial leg drive
Mhm.
while maintaining your back angle.
Yep.
After the leg drive, then you can open
Then
those
follow
hips
through.
to, yeah,
Yeah.
to basically, I would call it standing with the back. I say,
Yeah.
um, l- the way that I describe a clean deadlift or a snatch deadlift or a snatch or clean is legs, then back.
Mhm,
And then
mhm,
I also do a lot of reverse, which you have to do on the rowing machine as well.
mhm, mhm,
Now in reverse, it's back then legs,
mhm,
and
mhm,
separating, making the pull of a clean or a snatch two actions instead of just one. And so what you
mhm,
described first there to me was just one action. One, it should be a smooth action anyway, but just one action of getting from, where your body is in the bottom on the rowing
mhm,
machine,
mhm,
and then where it is on top. You're doing
mhm.
one action instead of separating it into two, legs and then back. And
Well, it's
then in
and then
Yep.
there's a smoothing out of that, where that way another piece of it, to ask for the second thing, is a lot of times people will sit up too tall and be too braced holding
Hmm.
it, right? And so you have to be strong and dialed in and connected through your middle and through your legs without being stiff, because
Mm-hmm.
your arms are almost more like ropes than being some sort of additive mechanism where you're really muscling it, because that's what causes that weird flop in the chain, and what causes kind of that abrupt, one rep done kind of motion, rather than something that's more smooth, where you are pushing the legs and unwinding the body, right? Rather than thinking of like, my legs are done and now I'm going to use my back. It's, how can I seamlessly fold these things in together, where it's, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's almost out. I have nothing left there. What can I add now? It's like adding the parts as you kind of move along through it and smoothing it out. If you find yourself sitting up so tall, and this is something that I do, especially like with everyone that I teach initially, is just basic setup, is if you lay on the ground, right? We all have this weird tunnel that happens in our low back, right? You're just
Mm-hmm.
kind of there. It's just how your body sits naturally. And so if you intentionally create even more of that, where all you're doing is using your back extensors to sit on the machine,
Mm-hmm.
you've told your hip flexors to turn on at the same time, which minimizes your ability to use your butt, and you want to be able to support yourself with your front too.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to lay down flat on the ground and like flatten that tunnel using your abs to do it, the ground's flat, your back is flat at that point, but
Mm-hmm.
it feels hollowed out. right? Even though clearly you're laying on a flat surface, it's definitely flat. There's no denying it. Yep, yep, the ground's flat. So then sit on the machine like that rather than up so tall. It's too extended, right? Too much thoracic extension will lead to that like curve in the low back, which will create that very short back extended stroke.
Yeah,
Oh,
same
that
kind of
wasn't
thing
too bad.
happens in gymnastics, of course, and weightlifting as well. If you're aggressively arching your back from either that's because that's what you feel like you need to do, someone told you to do that, it's just a cue that you misinterpreted. Basically, what you're saying is that they're turning off other parts of their body. So
Yes.
what we want is for you to set up in a way that's going to coordinate and engage you in the best possible way so you're as effective and as efficient as you can be. Now, in that regard, I have a question about what you said about the arms and them really being like ropes. And I used to use that cue and that concept in weightlifting as well. And I know a lot of weightlifting coaches do. And I understand what their purpose is. Their purpose is to get them to keep their arms straight. But whenever I thought about that and I said, okay, what do you actually do? Asking myself what I actually do in my start position and in through the movement of my snatch and clean. And what I'm actually doing is I'm aggressively locking my arms. So in my start position, I'm twisting my arms in as much as possible, and I'm flexing my tricep. And that is part of the overall engagement. And so because I'm doing that, I'm then pushing my knees out against those locked arms, and me pushing out with my knees and pushing against my knees with my arms. That's a part of what's engaging me as a whole. Now, it doesn't make sense to me that locking the arms that aggressively rep after rep after rep over on the rowing machine is going to be as effective or as
Right.
efficient.
Yeah.
But would you say that at least in the beginning, it would be better for someone to lock their arms aggressively so that they're straight over them being bent?
So a couple of factors in rowing specifically. Sometimes what I'll do as a drill for this is when you're sitting at the bottom position, as you mentioned, like the catch position, I'll have people rest their arm on their knees to take all the tension out. Just let it be. That way their hands aren't grabbing, the arms aren't grabbing at the time. And think about, rather than arm out here, turn the elbow down to lock it in. Cause I'm thinking more about the shoulder, right, than the arm itself. Because I mean, shoot, I have weird arms, right? Like that's, if I were to lock
You
my
have
arms,
weightlifter
that
arms.
would be
Yeah,
my
I would say
arm.
good gymnastics arms.
And that's not the least of it compared to, I have teammates that have crazy, locked up. But what might appear to be locked out isn't necessarily. But turning the elbow down allows my allows me to lock into my lat, which is going to be the more important point of connection for me from a rowing standpoint in the position that I'm in. And then if you can combine that feeling where now if I've turned my elbow instead of out, it turns down, then it really locks me into here. That's the part that I'm like, okay, I'm engaged here. But then by combining that with letting it sit on my knee, takes all the tension out of here. So that when I do go to push, you can't, my arm's too long to fit in the picture, but when I do go to push, you can actually, it locks my arm even more into my lat. So when there is pressure involved, it goes whoop, down there instead of up and over.
That's awesome. And that's something new that I learned right there. And it is a difference between what we teach in the clean and the snatch and clean deadlifts and snatch deadlifts, because we want the arm to be twisted in. So in what's known as internal, or people call it internal shoulder rotation. So that the pit of our elbow, the bend of our elbows, the pit of our elbows are facing each other. And that actually puts our arm in a stronger position to be able to push back on the bar and allows us to access our lats more. So it's different in a standing position. And that made sense to me when you said that, well, not in a standing position, but in an upright position that you're in on a rower, because in the standing position, or when the bar is overhead and we're upright in the bottom of the squat, our shoulder is now externally rotated, like you explained, and that allows us to access our lats more in that position. So when we're leaned over, we want internal rotation. When we're up and we're receiving, we want external rotation, whether the bar's overhead or whether the bar's in the front rack. So I'm going to use that for sure. That's very interesting.
It actually falls in line pretty well. I think just building off of that, Chad, it's how we teach correct preparation for handstand work. You do want to be thinking about that external rotation when you're corkscrewing down through the ground. So you can actually get the shoulder to be a little bit more aligned, and also how we hang.
Yeah.
we do want to be hanging a little bit more with that external rotation. And actually, it's very similar to what Jeff Martone and Zach teach in terms of overhead position with kettlebell as well. So
It's
I
all
do think there's
segmental alignment.
absolutely. There is a lot of synergy between overhead positions, hanging positions, kettlebell in hand, bar in hand, hanging or in handstand in terms of what Lindsay's talking about in terms of engagement, getting that lat involved.
That's, I had a friend of mine that I worked with years ago, Yogi. She was like, I don't lift weights. I've never lifted weights before. She was very nervous about going to this class that we were going to do. But as a yoga instructor and person who did yoga, she could do a zillion push-ups and handstands and all of it. So she understood that the alignment of her joints and her bones could help her to be able to leverage that to be strong. Is what she was doing, which is what ultimately creates the efficiency. How can I use my structure rather than just the muscles? How can I use all of the bones and the ligaments, the joint orientation itself to be even stronger, right?
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Then you develop the muscle around it and you go, oh my gosh, off the charts.
Well, the one thing you just mentioned there, because obviously the same thing with overhead position with a lot of weight, same thing with a lot of reps and handstand work. Soft tissue connection stability is critical in that development. So I don't want to kind of minimize the length of time that it takes to strengthen the connective tissue. For most people, they think, okay, if I just lag on my elbow, I'll be able to support overhead. You need a lot of time under tension. You need a lot of isometric work to be able to get those joints strong enough to be able to actually do those things overhead. You might have, the muscle itself strong enough, but whether or not you have the connective tissue strong enough is a completely different story. So you're right. It just spend more time on isometric holds, get used to your body in that position so you can apply it when it's needed once you have an actual load.
This is so interesting.
Yeah. And I'm just excited to go row now because I've always tried to twist my arm in because that's what I do in the start position of my snatch and clean. And now I'm going to twist it in the other direction and I'm going to finally be good at rowing just from that one change. Finally.
Chad something he potentially beat me at now.
Because a piece of that too is that it also, by doing it brings the center of gravity even lower, right? So we're looking to get our center of gravity as low as possible. Like that's why I said belly button down. Like how can I get from up here, which is a lot of tension in my upper back, to middle and lower. So that's another reason for that position difference.
I love it. I can't wait to go row. It's maybe the first time I've ever said that. I can't wait to go row.
Gonna go row a whole 200 meters and then call it a day.
Maybe like all I need probably 50 meters to figure it out. I can make changes pretty quickly. So
well, so just finishing out that stroke, you mentioned, the importance of waiting to push all the way through the legs before you start to change the angle of the torso, getting back involvement. But with the arms in and of themselves, like finishing with the arm pull, where do you recommend the pull actually going to? We're talking about belly button, but should the pull be more towards belly button and more towards chest?
Yeah, so a couple of things come into play there is height, right? So because the rowing machine is not as manipulable as the boat is, which is where someone who is a little bit shorter might want to consider sitting on a butt pad, because there is only one fixed point, right? Like where the chain is connected on the machine is a fixed height. So if you're taller, the chain's going to be at an angle like this. If you're right on it, it's going to be straight. If you're going to be a little lower, down a little bit. That's why it kind of matches to that. Ultimately, I like to equate it to kind of the height of where the length of your upper arm, so that way you're not fighting gravity to have to pull up. You're looking for horizontal motion. Be fast and efficient for horizontal. Any motion off of horizontal is going to be kind of an extraneous thing that isn't going to be as effective as just taking another stroke, right? So whatever allows the chain to be as horizontal as possible on the drive, right? Because I'm a big fan of tapping down. So the handle will go down on the recovery because it allows me to rest my upper body rather than holding it up, right? So when you actually go to, when you follow through, rather than pulling per se, you're following through, it's the natural height of your body. That's a big piece that I think a lot of coaches forget to think about, or just athletes when they're doing it. I've been taught to pull to here, but if we're all different torso heights and we all pull to the same height, that's technically a different height.
Right.
So horizontal is key then. Thinking about pulling horizontal.
Push horizontal.
Yeah, you go. Push.
Arms provide guidance to keep the cycle clean, right? The way that I equate this is, think about the top end, right? If you've just done a clean, are you still pulling incredibly hard to get it to, like, how does the bar increase speed and float at the top? Not because you acted incredibly fast in an upward motion with the upper body. It got there because of everything that you did from the ground, right? That's the only way it's going to get past your hips.
Yeah.
It's the only way it's going to accelerate.
Just let me say, I wish that was a great usable analogy for everyone, but it's not, because more people than not are pulling up on the bar in the way that you described, which we don't want. Yeah. Which I mean, maybe we could both use that as example. Say, I wish I could use this as a good example, but I can't, because you're doing it wrong in
pulling.
both.
Yeah,
in both
exactly.
directions.
In an ideal scenario, the bar is accelerating because of the work that your legs did.
Right. Love it.
Yeah.
We're coming towards the end, but I wanted to touch one more topic that I was going through your book. And one of the things that I noticed quite a bit going through the chapters is you put in a bunch of quotes that are from your journal through the years as little kind of tidbits and extra kind of insight into what was going on in your mindset as you were going through the years. Were the journals a huge, because I did the same thing in terms of keeping journals throughout my competitive career, but was the journal kind of an important part of your process in terms of being able to just release some of the internal things going on? Is it something that you still utilize today as now that you're past the competitive phase? Are you still kind of journaling?
Past the competitive phase. Yeah. If people often ask, or I've been asked, about sports psychology, because that's a big thing. It's a big resource now, especially at the collegiate level and all these things. And we really didn't access that many sports psychologists. And I honestly never felt that I needed to. I had other outlets. And I think maybe the journaling was one of those outlets where if I did have, something that I thought about, there was a day when I even wrote down, like, I had one of those days today. I even stepped in a puddle on the way to the car, like, I think everybody can relate to that. But being able to dump out those thoughts definitely let me just like put it out there and kind of talk to somebody about it, and it wasn't like, oh, I need to talk. It was like, this is just something that I'm doing that I find helps. And another really cool twofold thing about how it helps is that often it's really easy to get caught up in like what I'm doing. Oh man, I messed up today. I need to figure out, this thing I'm still working on, but you're also tracking the rights. And so I often would say that it seemed like, and correct me, you guys might have a different ratio, but it seemed like it could take 10 great days to make up for one bad one, and vice versa, right? Like one bad moment could just wipe away a week's worth of like steps forward. And tracking that stuff really helps keep that in perspective. It also helped with like the little nuggets that our coach would drop. And a lot of my teammates will ask, like, how do you remember this stuff? I'm like, well, I have a vivid image of him saying it, but I also have it written down, so I can tell you exactly what day he said it on.
Nice.
And that helps too, because it makes me go, gosh, all of those tiny, tiny little things, that weird little thing about my thumb might have been the reason why I figured something out technically.
Sure.
Chad, to ask you to go back to what you're saying about the elbow thing, we actually spent a period of time intentionally rowing with bent elbows, because people that don't have crazy elbows can't necessarily do that and still have their hand downward, right? That they can. Yeah. So if you bend your elbow a little bit, it helps you be able to have that position, and it allowed us to dial into our lats a little bit. We didn't do it for a long time, but it was a drill that we used that actually helped. Praying mantis rowing is what we called it.
Yeah, that's it's exactly what it looked like when you just demoed that there. That was nice.
Yeah, but those journaling pieces are something that I recommend a lot with my clients too, be able to, especially we talk about so many cues when we're working with people new to the sport. Chad does a really good job of outlining, how many cues people should be focusing on in any one given turn or any one given exercise. But people should be able to pick out what works for them mentally, what wording kind of resonates with them. And so the next time they can come back to a specific session that repeats, they can say, what was it again that actually hit me in the way that the wording came out? And for years and years, those types of things allowed me to get over those bad days a little bit more quickly, like you talked about, to be able to say, okay, having a terrible day today, I can't figure out why. Let me go back and see if there was another day that mimicked the same issue that I'm having today.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was a note that I had down that will allow something to potentially click and get me over this a little more quickly than the last time it happened. So to me, those journaling pieces and the fact that you kept such good notes and can use those as relatable things for future, projects, your book and other things that I'm
Yeah.
sure you're working on now,
Yep.
I think are hugely important. I was just curious whether or not you're still using that today as a way for you to kind of, get through the challenges that are coming at you now in life.
Yeah, and I realized that you mentioned that too, and I didn't answer that piece
No,
of it.
not
But
at
yeah,
all. Not at
no,
all.
I absolutely do. For lots of different reasons. And when it comes to journaling, it's kept training logs and journals, some of them separate and some of them combined. I would always write little notes in the margin of the training log. So you not only have, okay, was my mood better? And that's a big piece that people often overlook in their training logs is write down your mood. It makes a difference. That's your body giving you feedback, and we within ourselves have so many mechanisms where it's like, am I grouchy today? Something might be wrong. I might need to sleep. I might need to hydrate. I might not have eaten enough. Those are things that you can also track in your training logs. Like your numbers are you getting faster? What were you eating? Did you feel particularly good or bad today? Figure out all the potential variables without overstressing yourself. That's another piece that pops up, especially when I work with young people. We're talking like people in their teenage years in particular, or relatively new to something, is they ask, so it makes people a little bit more nervous sometimes to track things. And so the whole point is to gain back stress points, right? Like you can only, especially if you're taking, let's say athletics, since we're talking about athletics, to a high level, you are going to stress yourself out physically and mentally. So how can you conserve stress in other ways or regain it, right? And so if the journaling, track what is enjoyable at first until it becomes a habit. Like don't let the actual tracking itself, oh man, I missed a day. Like don't let that add stress to what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a really great point. So definitely add that in for all those athletes out there. I think the competitive side, definitely get a little bit more out of it. But even if it's the everyday weekend warrior, just trying to get better at their rowing, clean and jerk, or handstands, they can probably get a little bit better because of that jotting down after a session or between a session.
Yeah.
All right, Lindsay.
I was gonna say, do you mind if with one last thing with that,
Sure.
especially if we're talking weekend warrior in particular, like remind yourself of why you're doing it. Like I always say that whenever I go out for a run, which if I don't want to go and I'm like, oh gosh, I really don't, because that happens. I'll start by walking. And then eventually I'm like, man, it's nice. I'm just going to jog and then come on back. And when I come back, I am always glad that I did it. So leaving yourself that little note of, man, it was rough to get going, but boy, am I glad I did it. That 100% in the future too.
Absolutely. That first little step is the hardest part.
So essentially, I think what you're saying with journaling is don't let it overwhelm you. If you're going to do it, you don't feel like doing it that day, just write down a few words or a sentence and say, hey, that's enough for the day, unless I just get, the urge to keep going, like you were doing with the running.
Yeah.
Nice.
So Lindsay, I feel like we just scratched the surface with your story and where we can potentially go. And, you being part of our camp team and family now, I know we're going to have more time to speak with you and hear more about what's going on and dive a little bit deeper into your book. I want to just mention the title here, Better Great Than Never. Came out the end of 2020, essentially, not that long ago. So it's available. Chad will ask you a few more questions on the book specifically before we head out in terms of where people can find it. But I have a couple quick questions for you, if you wouldn't mind, kind of some rapid fire. First one, just one of the first in a while that I have no idea where we're going. But what sport or discipline do you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
Ooh.
You can't say rowing.
Because I've done both to a little bit. I know nothing about gymnastics. My body needs more weightlifting. I love gymnastics to watch it, but I physically need more muscles. Although I guess the gymnastics or the calisthenics, so they both do it.
All right, you said weightlifting first. I'll give Chad a point there.
Okay.
I think I'm about 9 out of the last 10, maybe.
Why are you keeping track so closely like that? I don't think it's 9 out of 10, to be honest with you.
That's not. I'm wishing. I'm hoping that we get a good little run here.
Question number 2, is there a guest, someone you've come across lately that you think we should have on the podcast? Who would be a good
Oh,
guest?
no, Kevin Sauer.
Oh yeah, wow. I would
Yeah,
love to. I would love to.
absolutely.
If he's available and up for it,
And
see if we can
able to
put us in
do it.
touch. It would be amazing.
It would. That
Does
would be
he
amazing.
have involvement right now leading up to 2021?
That I'm not sure of, actually. I know that there's a Virginia rower who is like one of the top people on the team right now. So hopefully we'll have another Virginia athlete.
Fantastic.
Virginia athletes, for the record, Virginia rowers have not had as many rowers, but for the rowers that have gone, all, if not almost all, have medaled.
Oh
Nice.
wow.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Wow.
We had in 2008, we had 4, and all of us came away with medals.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah.
It's quite a streak. You got to keep that
Yeah.
alive.
Yeah.
It's just what they say, something's in the water there, right?
Something
In the water. All right. Well, aside from your own book, is there any books that you've come across lately that you'd recommend to the listeners?
Actually, 2 of my favorite books. One book is called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. My doppelganger is a 70-year-old Japanese man. What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, I rather like. And the first half or first third of Born to Run. Born
2
to Run.
running books, huh?
Well, yeah, because it's like my meditation. I used to hate running, and here I like to run. Born to Run, actually, I would say, even over now, in the first portion, because one of my favorite parts about it, to give you the rapid fire answer here, is that it talks about the Raramuri, which is the running tribe in Mexico. And one of my favorite pieces of it is that they can't figure out why these people are so fast. But one of the assessments is that when they run by and win these races, they have this look of joy, like they've literally just been enjoying a run through the woods. And that is key, is the joy.
There you go. Well, I was about to say we won't put those on the list since they're running books, but it sounds like there's more to that book than just running.
There
so
is.
I like it.
And the story portion in particular, not necessarily like, oh, buy these running shoes portion of it, but the story about the running tribe is interesting in the beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, for your own book, as Dave mentioned, can you let us know the title one more time and where people can find that?
Yeah, Better Great Than Never. And the subtitle is Believing It's Possible is Where Champions Begin. You can find it on Amazon very easily. You can also look me up at Lindsay Shoop, and with the middle name, it makes it very easy to find.
Awesome. Well, listeners out there, be sure to check that out. I still need to get a copy myself and read through that as well. Looking forward to that for sure. Is there anything else coming up that you want folks to know about? Any more books in the works or anything else going on?
I actually just wrote a chapter for a textbook, but that's I will eventually write the second part of the book, because this one goes up through the Olympics and kind of what that did in my life. But there is more to the story after that. But I need a little time, because writing a book, much like the Olympics, takes a lot out of you.
I'm sure Chad would just like to do a podcast specifically on writing the book, since he's been working on his for a while now.
Yes.
Definitely. I've got, I always have a lot of writing questions, but I don't get to them because that's not the topic of the conversation. So it would be good to have a recording on that alone for sure. It's very inspiring and motivating to me, all the authors that we have on these podcasts. So I'm always enjoying hearing about it, and leave the recording just ready to do some more writing. So I love it. And
I swear the number of times that stories that I wrote about the Olympics that helped me write the book itself, we're using the habits that I learned through training to write the book. It's just incredible application,
Absolutely. That's what sport does for all of us. That's what CrossFit does for a lot of people, is it teaches you that discipline that you can apply in your life. And that's what it's all about. And to the listeners out there, guys, as always, we very much appreciate you listening in, and don't let me forget to tell Lindsay, thank you as well very much for being on it. It was an absolute pleasure. I always hate that it's, camps are 5 to 7 months apart. It's too long. I wish we could all get together a little bit more often. I know that only a few weeks out from camp, and I think we're all having camp withdrawals, as we always do, right? But look forward to seeing you again, Lindsay. Thank you again for joining us. And to our listeners, guys, be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. Also, check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and at Ollie Chad. On behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your host. I'm Chad Vaughn with Dave Durante. And until next time, guys, thank you all for listening.